You're listening to the Earful Tower, a show where I usually interview a guest about their life in Paris. But not this week. The guest isn't a person. It's a wall. Yep, I'm going to take you on a journey around my newest obsession, my newest fascination in Paris, the Philippe Auguste Wall. Now, before you start thinking, oh my god, I didn't come here to listen to a wall talking, don't worry, I'm not interviewing the wall. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a storytelling session with you guys. And this is a wall that circled Paris around 800 years ago and was gradually torn down, built over, and swallowed up by Paris as the city expanded upwards and outwards, with the wall never to be seen again. Or was it? Unbelievably, some relics and vestiges of this ancient wall have remained intact, and many of them have been hidden for centuries and were only revealed in fairly recent renovations. And you can still find traces of this wall in the most unlikely places in the city. But the best bit of it all? One historian told me when I was researching for this episode that there are still likely to be remnants of this 800-year-old wall that haven't been found yet. So with this in mind, I followed the entire trace of the wall to see what I could uncover, and I met all kinds of interesting people along the way. So over the next half an hour, you're going to hear my Da Vinci Code-like journey on a much smaller budget with a few interesting guests and a remarkable part of Paris history that's right in front of everyone's noses, but which no one seems to notice. Here's my story of the Philippe Auguste Wall.
One man, one country, one red scooter. Here's the Earful Tower with Oliver G.
Okay, so sit back, relax. Imagine you're in Paris in 1190, the year 1190, so 800 years ago. Now, of course, the city of Paris was a lot smaller back then. In fact, it was way, way smaller. But the king, Philippe Auguste, was very proud of it, and he didn't want it to be invaded by the British when he went off on one of his crusades. So, to protect Paris, he built this enormous wall around the entire thing, and I mean enormous. I found a French website all about the wall, and it gives some stats. It says the wall ran for 2,800 meters on the right bank, 2,600 meters on the left bank. It was 3 meters thick at the base, 9 meters high, and with a 14-meter high tower every 70 meters. In fact, the wall was so big that it even encircled several fields and orchards just in case Paris was ever under siege. In other words, the Parisians walled themselves in.
But people would actually travel to the city just to view this amazing protective wall that went around Paris.
That's the voice of Christian, who runs Bike About Tours in Paris. He's something of an expert on the wall, and his tours even go past some parts of it.
Because the city actually doubled in population in about 5 years' time. So Paris, in the 1200s, it was about 50,000 people, and it almost doubled in size to about 100,000 in 30, 40 years. So it did its job, basically.
Anyway, what I find the most interesting is that unlike many other city walls, they never really tore down this Philippe Auguste version. After all, this wall was so expensive to build, so they just figured, why not build on top of it? So I found myself fascinated by this wall, and as I was sort of researching it, I walked past this shop in the Marais that's called Paris Historique, or Paris Historique, and I was attracted to this shop because there's these really big, old, beautiful black and white maps in the window and inside. So I went in and I was looking at these maps, and I got talking to this historian who agreed to be interviewed, but unfortunately she doesn't speak really a word of English. So she's showing me these maps and she's explaining how all the different city walls were built in the city. And I'm just going to let you listen to her speak French a little bit so you can feel that you're in Paris with me. Here she is pointing to the maps, explaining all the various city walls throughout the centuries.
Et ensuite, vous avez eu l'enceinte de Philippe Auguste, donc du roi Philippe Auguste, et c'était à partir de 1200.
Now, of course, this is a podcast in English, so we can't just carry on with her speaking in French. So what I've done is I've hired the talents of a female translator and impressionist to give you a realistic feeling if this woman could speak English. So here's what she said when I was talking to her about the wall.
If you want to discover the real history of Paris, if you go to see one of these walls, you get a real story, you get the real history of Paris. And so these things they discovered with the passage of time, and not everything has been discovered yet.
What? There are unfound bits of the wall too? With this in mind, I decided to trace the entire path of the wall, at least on the right bank to start with. So I took a photo of one of the old maps in the shop, which I must say the elderly lady wasn't very happy about. She wanted me to buy it, but I got a photo anyway. And I even got a photo with her in it. You can check it. Everything that I mention in this episode is going to be on theearfultower.com. So I took a photo of the map and I laid it over a current map of the city, and I decided to trace the entire wall on the right bank. Now, of course, the old city wall is 800 years old, and it doesn't follow the same streets as today. It cuts through what are now big city blocks, across streets, through residential areas, through supermarkets. In other words, it's impossible to actually follow the line of the wall as you would have done in the 12th century. But what was easy was to start at the most obvious place. Down in the Marais, you can find the best example of this city wall. It runs alongside what's now a basketball court. I've mentioned on the show before, there's this long stretch of wall. So I've mentioned on the show before, I actually play basketball. The court's down here. And the place that we're playing basketball is actually, we would have been on the outside of the city limits. In fact, I've looked at some photos from the shop I mentioned before. We would have been playing basketball in a moat underwater if we were playing today, according to some of the pictures anyway. But this wall, this part of the wall is the best place if you want to see it, to get a glimpse of what it would have been like. According to Christian, it's one of the best places too. Christian from Bike About Tours. Have a listen.
The largest part of that wall is still there, and it goes, I'd say, 300 meters? It's part of actually a kind of a high school sports field now. And we actually always laugh because the kids are kicking the ball against the old wall, and I have a feeling they don't know what it is.
So I wondered if he was right. While I went down to the courts, I spoke with a French guy who regularly plays basketball on the site, Cyril. Have a listen to what he has to say.
I think most of the people who play there don't really know about this wall. I mean, you are in Paris, so you kind of expect to have this kind of old architecture all around, but most of the time you don't really know about it.
I asked him if it bothered people that people were kicking balls against the wall.
I think it's good that people take the city for themselves a little bit, you know. So no, it doesn't bother me so much. It's a beautiful architecture wall. But on the other hand, it's kind of normal that people do whatever they want, you know. No, it doesn't bother me. You have a lot of old things in Paris that it doesn't really get destroyed or anything, you know. So it's good to still see it and be able to play next to it.
Interesting point, Cyril. I'd never thought of it like that, but it's true. Paris is basically a museum. You can't go covering it all up. So it was here that I started my journey retracing the wall at the courts on the Rue des Jardins Saint-Paul. Now remember, all these addresses I'm mentioning, they're all going to be on the earfultower.com. So all you people who like to take notes during episodes, and I know there are some of you out there, you can put down your pencils, just relax. We're in 1190 here. You probably didn't have a pencil anyway. So I texted a few friends, asked if they wanted to join me on this kind of treasure hunt. And two of them met me, Mike, an Australian expat in Paris, and his French wife, Anne-Laure. So it's their voices you'll be hearing scattered throughout the rest of the episode.
For me, it was about, I guess, discovering a part of Paris that I guess is all around us and under us, but it's something that you just pass over or don't see until someone points it out to you.
As a French person, I would say I don't know much about France or French history, even less so about Paris, where I've been living for over 7 years. And I feel like it's important to know about the place you live in, especially when you don't have the excuse of saying that you are an expat. And so I thought this would be a really nice opportunity to learn more about it.
So from the basketball courts, we cut around the Saint-Paul Cathedral via the narrow and, frankly, the urine-smelling Rue de Prévost, very narrow. You can almost touch both sides of it. Then we headed to the Rue de Sévigné in the 4th arrondissement. So the maps I had suggested that the wall would have cut through what today is a fire station. So through the windows, I talked to some of the firefighters who assured me there was an impressive chunk of the wall under their very building. Of course, I asked if I can go in and see it, and if I thought I was going to get access, I could basically think again. I've not even seen it, the fireman told me, and I work here. Now, I would have obviously liked to interview him, but when I asked if I could, he said firefighters aren't allowed to talk to the press, not even for Paris-based podcasts hosted by Australians. You can't really get into these fire stations except once a year at the Fireman's Ball, which at this very fire station, they have wild rave-like discotheque parties once a year. I went to one of them, I think a year or two ago. Fantastic, but that's another episode. Anyway, fair enough. We moved on. We couldn't get in to see the firefighters part of the wall, but I knew there'd be more, and it wasn't long until we struck gold. We were walking along a street in the Marais called Rue de Rosières. It's a really beautiful street, cobblestones, old falafel restaurants, really beautiful. Lots of chasse-rue for you regular listeners who know my favorite part of Paris, and for you guys who don't know what I'm talking about, this is the old stone guards that stopped the wagon wheels from damaging the walls. Check my website for a really cool story about them. Anyway, so we're walking along the street, and on the north side, there's this tiny entrance to a park that's called the Jardin des Rosiers. So if you blinked, you'd miss this entrance. And I know this because I've walked down that street countless times. I never knew there was a park in there. We walk inside, and bam, there it is, right in the middle of the entrance to the park, is this massive tower. So one of the towers that were every 70 meters, and it's just right there as you walk in. I couldn't believe it. There's a little sign explaining, in French, of course, not in English, that this was a vestige, as they say in French, from this city wall. And you can just go up to it and touch it. But everybody's just walking past it, basically, and going around the corner where there's this beautiful big fig tree and this kind of secret little hidden park where a few in-the-know Parisians are having little coffee dates and romantic flings, I guess, with their mistresses and misters, if they're into that kind of thing. But we went in there, it was fascinating. So we're standing there, we're looking around, trying to figure out which way the wall went from there. Mike had even been in there before, but hadn't even noticed this wall. But it was brilliant, so we felt like we'd kind of struck gold, you know? And we took a few pictures all on the site, and we continued on in the direction that the wall seemed to be pointing. So we were pretty encouraged at this point that we'd found this really good part of the wall, and we continued on until we got to an even better bit. There's this grand old building with a sign out the front that says Crédit Municipal de Paris on the Rue Franc-Bourgeois, which regular listeners might remember April in the episode for the best streets in every arrondissement. She said this was the best street. And I have to agree with you, April, this is a good one. So we're walking down, there's this big, amazing red door with this amazing, huge door knocker on each of them. So there's two of them. And you go in and you get into this huge courtyard. So a lot of the Parisians are going in there for getting bank loans or whatever they're doing. And on the cobbled floor, you see these different cobblestones in a different color, which it turns out are marking the exact tracing of the wall. So these parallel lines about 3 meters apart cut through the courtyard. And if you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd have no idea that it would have been an 800-year-old wall. But that wasn't the best bit. If you walk into this courtyard and turn immediately to the right, those cobblestones, different colored cobblestones, continue straight into an amazingly huge tower, a second tower like the one that we saw in the park before. But this one is even better because on top of it, they've got a new addition to it. New, I mean, it's not recent, but they've got a bricked, increased addition to the tower. So it really looks like this kind of, I don't even know, you go in and you feel like you've stepped back into yesteryear. But at the base of it is this brilliant old part of the wall with this huge line. So you really feel you can walk along the line. You feel like you're walking as the Parisians would have walked on top of the 3-meter thick tower way back in the 1190s and 1200s. From there, we walked out, we continued the tour. And what you might think, I don't know if it'll sound uninteresting, but for us, we found what was kind of the most exciting part of the tour. We were walking around. Every time we found a trace, we were kind of giving each other 10 points, me, Mike, and Anne-Laure. We had this feeling of it being a kind of a treasure hunt, especially because I couldn't find any maps pointing out these bits. We were just walking this wall, finding the bits as we went. And so we were walking along and we find these sort of raised, cat's eyes in the middle of a road. We found these really unusual cat's eyes cutting directly across the street in a kind of diagonal shape. And Mike pipes up and goes, "That is the wall."
We were just walking along, heading towards Pompidou area. And maybe 30 minutes earlier in the treasure hunt, I had mentioned how we ride over things from time to time, like cobblestones or bits and pieces on the road that seem bizarre until you know what they are. And we just happened to stumble across one on Rambuteau.
It looked like a regular road marking or something not irrelevant, but that had nothing to do with what we were looking at. It's not like we were trying to find a vestige or a piece of it.
It was, I said, this has got to be the wall. This has got to be it, because it just has the same sort of width or area or size, I guess, as the size of the wall that we'd just seen, the pavers. And then we looked in the direction where we'd just come from, and it was those metal dots on the ground, just like I discussed half an hour earlier. And it's only now that we all were like, wow, this is actually the wall, and this is exciting to know that this is here, and we have walked, ridden, driven over this area, I don't know how many times, countless times, and then to discover it and be a part of that discovery was exciting, I guess. It was surprising and amazing. And it kind of made me think, well, if they know where it is, why don't they do this all over Paris?
So from here, we're getting really excited. We're finding all these cool bits. We're turning around. We walk up onto Rue du Temple. And I don't know, I guess I kind of get overexcited by it. And every time a courtyard opened as someone walked out, we snuck in behind the person walking out of their residential courtyard or whatever. And we're looking around for either parts of the wall or signs or anything we could find, knowing full well that a lot of these places are in residential, private property that you can't find unless you happen to be inside the courtyard. So we're walking in, we're looking for these bits, not really finding anything. And then we get to the Museum of Art and History of Judaism. So I figure the wall must have gone right through this building. So we go in there, open the door, and I say to the guy, I was like, hey, look, we're looking for the old wall. And at first he was like, what are you doing, man? This is the Museum of Art and History of Judaism. And I sort of explained what I was looking for, and then his eyes lit up, and he goes, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. We don't get asked about this so much. Come in, come in. And he brings us through the security gates. Like, he had to go through, it was like an airport. So we get in there, and we come into this big, amazing, beautiful courtyard. And he explains to us that even though the courtyard has 3 walls, so you're looking forward, left, right, and straight ahead of you. He goes, the wall on the left is a facade. It's a fake wall. Even though there's windows, they go through to nothing. And he said that whole facade was built onto the city wall. So you can't see it, but if you look closely, there's just this fake wall inside this building. You can only go through doors on the directly in front and to the right. And so while you couldn't see the wall, he explains to us that that's exactly how the city was kind of built, like they just built onto this wall. They didn't rip it down. They used the rocks that were already there. So we kind of found this extra trace. And, I took photo of that as well, and we took leave. We didn't go into the museum that day. I'm sure it's a lovely museum. We just looked at where the wall ran. And then we left, and we went around trying to see from the inside. But once again, a courtyard, we couldn't get in. But we had this, now it was Da Vinci Code. We felt like we were really onto something. So we continued around, and then if you go all the way around to the next street over, you find that there's this Anne Frank garden, which is another hidden garden. I had no idea it existed. But we found this entrance, and we go in there. There's another explanation for the wall, and we check it out. There's no remnants of it except one kind of big brick bit in the corner with no sign. Could be it. Didn't know. Took a picture. And we continued on. But from there, we found no clues for a long while. We went on all the streets. There were no more markings on the ground, no more obvious signs. There was one little one, but nothing on the ground, no part of the wall. And then we kind of hit what I think was one of the biggest jackpots. We got to this place called La Tour Jean Sans Peur, which is actually a museum. In fact, if you want to know exactly what it is, I looked it up. It has the last vestige of the palace of the Dukes of Burgundy with displays on its history and construction. That's another episode that I probably never will make. That's not what I was interested in that day. What I was way more interested in is that when you go into the lobby of this building, there is an enormous tower, another one of the remaining towers. Could it be part of the wall? Yes it was. And I went in there and I was talking to the guy, really nice guy, Remy his name was, and we were talking a little bit about the wall, and he got so excited to hear that someone was doing this treasure hunt rather than to see the Dukes of Burgundy like everybody else was, that he personally took us down into this tower. You can go down some steps, and he says, do you know, this is what he said, do you know I have my office inside the tower? He took us in. Unfortunately, he didn't want to be on the podcast. He didn't think his English was good enough, and the rest of the staff didn't want to be on the podcast either, but I can imitate them. He said, come into my office. And we walk down these little steps. There's a little door, and you walk into one of the towers. It's like amazingly well preserved. You would never know. Anyone going to that museum, I assume, is going there to see something else. But in his office, you could look up at a skylight above, and you felt really like you were back in, 1190. That's how I felt anyway. So we took some pictures. We had a little bit of a chat. I looked through some of his books. And then we're off again, heading through a really interesting part of town. Anyway, the Rue Montorgueil, one of my favorite streets in Paris. And we ended up at another fire station, which also has inaccessible vestiges in the basement. Talked to another fireman who also didn't want to be interviewed. So we continue on, and then there's one of the really interesting vestiges of this wall on Rue de Louvre, a big old street down in the first arrondissement. The same street, incidentally, you guys who are on the new YouTube channel might have seen me with the author Cara Black on the back of my red scooter scooting down the other day. Check out that video after this if you haven't. Anyway, Rue de Louvre, there's a really incredible part of an old, not just an old tower, but one of the city gates. So it goes really high up into the air. And what you see is this sort of concave part of a wall that they apparently discovered fairly recently when they were making a ventilation shaft for the metro. It's unusual, it's beautiful, it's incredible, and it's just there in the middle of the street. Really inexplicable. If you go past, you wouldn't know what you're looking at, but it was really cool. So by this point, we continue on and we come to the Rue Saint-Honoré, which is a really beautiful and famous street in the first arrondissement. And we got to a place, there's a little sign on the wall. This is where the gate to the city would have been. So it was really cool. We're just standing in the middle of the street, people walking past, and we're thinking, 800 years ago, we would have been walking into Paris at this point. But right now, it's so central. And there's no real clues that are obvious. But if you really look carefully, you can see that the buildings inside their facades are on a really unusual angle to the street, because they were all built on this ancient city wall as well. Anyway, if we had have continued on to the Louvre Museum, bought a ticket and gone downstairs, you could see even more remnants of a massive fortification, a massive fort that the king built there at the entrance to the city. But I was more interested in the parts that were accessible to the public, so I didn't go into the Louvre. You guys can check that out if you ever make it to the Louvre. Make sure you go downstairs. But we decided to call it a day there after walking the entire right bank section of the wall. It basically ended the walk. We felt that we'd really kind of seen a new part of Paris, and Mike and Anne-Laure were pretty happy too.
Yeah, I guess for me it felt like a treasure hunt. You would walk into a park and you're like, is it here? And then we would see that little bulletin or whatever it is, the sign that would tell you this is the Philippe Auguste l'enceinte. And you'd be like, yes, we found another one. And so that was the exciting part. It was a treasure hunt. It really was.
So is it wrong to go around asking people to look in their gardens or to walk into people's courtyards? Do the French people mind this kind of stuff? Seeing I had a French woman in the studio, I asked Anne-Laure what she thought.
I feel most French people, if you show an interest in their city, they're open to answering your questions. It depends if you come up to them and if you forget to say bonjour, and if you try and show that you're interested, I feel like they're open enough. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by how open they were and how much, I guess it's not something that they get every day, someone showing interest in l'enceinte de Philippe Auguste.
The sad thing is we didn't find any of the hidden or undiscovered parts of the wall, at least not this time. And, I guess it would have been a probably better episode if I'd made some amazing discovery of a part that no one had discovered before, but I think that was fairly unlikely. I enjoyed finding these parts for myself. I enjoyed finding these things that, even though, for example, all three of us live in Paris and I hang out in the Marais a lot, I'd never seen, I think, any of these parts beside the basketball part of the wall. And of course, I know that there's a whole lot more of this wall on the left bank, but that's another episode. But just wandering around the right bank and seeing all these parts with kind of fresh eyes, it was a fantastic experience. It's always amazing to know the things that are right under your nose. In fact, it kind of makes you wonder how many other Paris mysteries and curiosities there are that are right under our nose. And of course, always keep your eyes open when you're walking around Paris. And I should add, and always listen to the Earful Tower. Now, that concludes the bit about the Philippe Auguste Wall. More to come in a second, but if you want more episodes like this, or you want to hear what's on the left bank when it comes to this wall, get in touch, send me an email. I love to hear them. But for the wall, we're done. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Earful Tower podcast.
Anyway, that's it for this episode of the Earful Tower. I hope you enjoyed it. Bit of a different episode. Not usual that I have a wall as the guest, but I quite enjoyed featuring it. I'm obsessed, as maybe you can tell. This is the part where I usually encourage you to sign up on Patreon and all that stuff, but I'm not going to do it this week. I'm going to let someone else do it. Here's a new review that came through that I loved. It's a 5-star review. Here's the headline: Terrific tales, twists, and turns around Paris, from Passonan. It says, I can't get enough of my favorite subject, Paris, and so since discovering the Earful Tower, I'm hooked. Oliver G is a clever Australian who's made Paris his home and is sharing all he's learned about the city with others. His seemingly insatiable curiosity benefits us all as we go along for the ride, sometimes on his red scooter, which is his trademark transport. That is true. On most episodes, he features guests who share their expertise and little-known tidbits, historic facts, and secrets of Paris. Oliver has a special talent to inform and entertain, combined with a dash of boyish charm. It's like having a new best friend in Paris. I have to give him a lot of credit for delivering all this in a podcast. I binged on catching up on all the past seasons and now anxiously await each new episode. Don't get too anxious, but every Monday, by the way. Every Monday, new episode. It continues, I've recommended the Earful Tower to friends near and far. That is my favorite bit. Keep recommending, guys. If you don't want to sign up, recommend. That's the best way to help this show grow. He continues, or she continues, I just signed up on Patreon to support Oliver in his goal to make it his full-time endeavor. It'll be a win-win since I receive even more information on my favorite subjects, all things Paris and France. Greetings from California. Thank you so much for that lovely review. I love to read it. I never check in on the reviews until right before I record this end bit to the episode, so it's always a pleasure to see that there's something there. And you guys feel free to leave reviews so I've got something to read for the upcoming episodes. But yeah, just as that reviewer said, if you guys want to support the show, consider signing up on Patreon. Episodes like this take ages to make. It's hard to get a wall to speak. So no, thank you. Thanks for signing up and thanks for your patronage. In other news, the honeymoon season is, oh God, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it starts on August 15th. Me and my fiance, she'll be my wife then, if all goes according to plan. We're going to travel around the entire France on the red scooter in a big love heart shape. So imagine this, starting in Paris, heading to the northwest towards Brittany, then looping down towards Marseille and around there, then back up on the other side. 6 weeks showcasing France. Going to do a lot of it on the podcast, a lot of it behind the scenes for Patreon so that we can afford fuel for the scooter. You know, it only costs €5 to fill a scooter up, believe it or not. Anyway, I want to just say thanks to all your kind emails, the people who've made really generous donations, helpful suggestions. All this is bringing non-stop smiles to the face of myself and my betrothed. I don't know if I used the word betrothed correctly then, but let's go with it. Now, there's lots of other good stuff coming up on the hidden... You know what? I don't know if I've explained this properly yet because I was at this piano recital at the Australian Embassy yesterday on Sunday, and it was a guest I'd had on the show before, both the ambassador and the piano player, Bonnie Brown. And I was there sitting up towards the front, and at the end of the piano recital, this American lady comes up to me and she says, "Hey, you Oliver? Yeah, great. I listened to the show." She said, "I'd heard that you'd interviewed the pianist and I just came to see it as well. Love the show. Keep up what you're doing. It was really lovely to meet you, Julie, if you're listening still." But she also said, "I don't get how all the Patreon stuff works, so I'm just going to explain just quickly. If you guys sign up on this Patreon, it's a paid membership. It's $10. There's lots of levels, but I'm focusing on the $10 a month. If you subscribe on Patreon for that, you get access to this closed Facebook group. And inside this closed Facebook group and a closed YouTube channel, every week, and in fact this month more than every week, I do these walk shows where I get an interesting guest. We walk down the street of Paris. We do it live on Facebook. The video remains after if you want to watch it. And this month, June 2018, I've got some really good guests coming. Here's a little taste of just some of them, right? I got Stephen Clark, the author. He's going to be talking to me about the French Revolution. He's just written a new book about it. He's going to explain it to me like I'm an idiot, which shouldn't be hard because I am an idiot in that French Revolution. I tried watching a documentary about it the other day. No idea what was going on. He's going to explain it. We're going to be walking around the left bank. He's going to be talking about guillotines, blood, guts, all that kind of stuff. Great author, great books. Another author, Elaine Chalino from episode 2 on the Eiffel Tower. We're going to be walking down Rue de Martyrs. Yeah, she wrote a book called The Only Street in Paris. Together we're going to walk all the way one end to the other. And yeah, that's for all you Patrons too. We've got Frank Barron, this guy that does Cake Boy Paris. He's going to take me down the best street for bakeries in Paris. I said I wouldn't tell you where it is, but I'm going to. It's Rue de Bac on the left bank. We're going to be walking one end to the other. He's going to be showing me where to get the best pastries, all that kind of stuff. And then we got other ones, another one with April Pett, one with Jay Swanson, Finding Invaders. We're going to do one about gay Paris because it's Pride coming up. I've got the guys that do gay tours around Paris going to be taking me down Rue des Archives in the Marais. Anyway, there's loads of stuff coming up. I probably missed a few then. That's all just in June. Not to mention the bonus audio, all the other stuff that you get. Consider signing up. And of course, you get the guide to Paris that I released a week or two ago with 150 things to do in Paris. You get that for free on sign up. And lastly, I've been giving tours to some listeners. So when listeners get in touch, they say, "Hey, let's meet for a coffee." I say, "Hey, let's meet for a tour." And we do a walking tour. And lately I've been showing a lot of people this Philippe Auguste Wall, which if you don't know what the Philippe Auguste Wall is, I'm baffled. It means you haven't been listening for 25 minutes. But if you come to Paris, I'll show you that. It's a way that it's a way to basically support the show as well. So consider that. If you're interested in a walking tour with a bit of a twist, get in contact with me and I might just show you my Paris. I think that's enough for now. I think maybe we've all learned something. Maybe you've considered signing up. For you guys who have signed up, thank you for making this almost what I could consider to be a full-time job, almost what I can consider to be a career. Really, I don't have much more to say. Thank you very much, and a few more episodes left of this season. Then I'm going to get married. Then we've got the honeymoon season, and we'll see where it goes from there. I'll talk to you next week. A bientôt.